We would like to start our presentation for you today with some good news that we're not sure made it over to the UK. While we were writing our paper to present to you, a night parrot was found deep in remote interior Western Australia on the 21st of August. This parrot was found on Madu country, an area of approximately 14 million hectares that encompasses part of the Great Sandy and Little Sandy deserts, along with Kalamilya National Park. The Matu are a grouping of several groups of the traditional landowners of the Western Desert region, which is incredibly harsh and inhospitable. Average temperatures of over 40 degrees Celsius for half the year, minimal rainfall, the kind of country in which a car breaking down could be fatal. This specimen was found after a 2-year joint effort by local Matu rangers and scholars from the University of Queensland. This project has worked to combine traditional knowledge of country with academic science. And as Dr. Stephen Murphy from UQ said in a statement following the bird's discovery, the recent discovery of night parrots on Madu country is a great example of two-way science, where detailed knowledge of country was combined with knowledge of night parrot ecology to identify the kinds of places the species might persist. The discovery illustrates how supporting people to be on country, which maintains and builds knowledge, can lead to nationally significant conservation outcomes. And this is a crucial point and one that we will return to, but we just wanted to make mention of this development before we dive in. So why is this discovery of such importance? This incredibly cryptic, low-density, nocturnal denizen of the arid interior has achieved an almost mythical status among birders, coming to be known as the holy grail of Australian ornithology. But why? The night parrot lacks the vibrant colours of various native finches and lorikeets, the distinctive and seemingly derisive character of the kookaburra, the endless allure of the tawny frogmouth. Described at varying points as a fat budgie or a budgie on steroids, this small and somewhat dumpy bird, its plumage, an array of bright green and dull yellows and grey browns, has captured the imagination of Australian ornithologists, citizen scientists and communities for centuries. The reason for this, and for the celebration that occurred on the 21st of August 2020, is that the bird was, for all intents and purposes, extinct for the better part of the last 100 years. And this brings us to our first engagement with the notion of the borderland, the locatedness of the night parrot betwixt extinction and existence, absence and presence.
We apprehend the night parrot here first at the intersection of this most basic of taxonomic categories. As the categorical distinction between absence and presence shows, this borderland is not a rigid one, but contains shadows, overlapping delineations, and entanglements. Following from a Derridean construction, concepts of absence and presence are more complicated than a strict definitional opposition. A self-referential reliance on the definition of each term sees presence positioned as the fact or condition of being present, and absence is the state of being absent or away. Each bears the trace marker of the other, defined as much by what it is as what it is not. We see this too, captured within the form of this green, dumpy parrot as it escapes from the frame of presence into speculative extinction. We materialize the absence of the night parrot through the work of Meyer and Woodthorpe, who present 3 categories for marking the presence of absence. The first being that absence can be spatially located. Second, that absence can have some kind of materiality, some kind of stuff. And lastly, that absence can have agency. It acts or does things. This agency will become significant for us later in this paper as we consider the borderlands crossed by the night parrot. As Derrida famously states, there is nothing outside the text, but we move through this outsidedness, crossing the border between presence and absence towards an apprehension of the night parrot, these frames of being between. We will come to this outsidedness as we look to Indigenous worldviews which challenge the strict limitations of Western epistemology and our consideration of a specific Matu story which tells of the origins of the night parrot and its challenge to borderlands of being. As we look to the Indigenous knowledge surrounding the night parrot, there is a further emphasis of this Derridean spectre, the crossing of borders between presence and absence, in which thinking around the night parrot can be refigured in light of the mark of the absence of a presence, or the lack at the origin that is the condition of thought and experience. This condition of thought or experience is a challenge to the structures of Western scientific knowledge through which the parrot slipped. As for this first borderland, this flitting between life and death, the bird seemed to be a trace of life pre-invasion, pre-development and industry in the introduction of livestock and spread of feral animals across the landscape. Since the last confirmed sighting and capture of a specimen in 1912 in Nickel Springs near Meekatharra, the bird essentially disappeared, just another on a long list of things that have disappeared since the arrival of the white man on this land. Following this, all but one of the records of night parrots in WA before the 1940s were made at localities currently under pastoral leasehold. The majority of these sightings were made by Martin Burgoyne. Despite these areas being subject to repeated searches, these regions have yielded only a sprinkling of unconfirmed reports, which continued to trickle in through the 20th century, but lacked real, tangible proof of the bird's existence.
That was, however, until the discovery of 2 dead specimens in Western Queensland in 1990 and 2006, and a sighting at Minga Wells, WA, in 2005. These were followed by the now infamous rediscovery of the night parrot in 2013 by naturalist John Young at what is now Pullen Reserve in Western Queensland. Further populations in Diamantina National Park, also in central Western Queensland, and photographs of night parrots from the Kimberley region of WA in 2017 and 2018. This spate of sightings over the last 15 years, while still rare, seem to suggest not only that the night parrot has survived, largely unseen, unrecorded and unknown for the last century, but that it has maintained an absent presence across the state borders and is now seen to persist despite the disruption of much of what was thought to be its original habitat by resource extraction, pastoral leases, and so on. While the continued existence of the night parrot gives us some hope for the future, and the viability of species through disruption and major anthropogenic ecologic change and degradation, it provides a way for us to travel back in time. We follow the mentions of this bird through the journals of those that came before us, the various explorers and scientists that explored the harsh interior of Australia in search of water and pastures. What can be learnt from the early records, from the history of land use and its governance, and from landscape processes to explain changes to or loss of original habitats? Can this assist the targeting of searches, management for habitat recovery, or prospects for reintroduction of the parrot in parts of this former stronghold? When we turn to those early records, we engage with the rich history of the search for the night parrot across recent Australian colonial histories. It's populated by a memorable cast of characters who in turn meet varying misfortunes as they've sought it, falling victim to what some have called the curse of the night parrot. And whilst our time here is too brief to recount it for you in necessary detail, we can recommend Penny Olsen's book, The Night Parrot, Australia's Most Elusive Bird, which provides an in-depth account of this search. But we'll travel back in time here from that 1912 sighting, chasing the spectre of the night parrot through the archives. The first specimen of the night parrot, or the beautiful ground parakeet, was collected in October 1845, north of Coopers Creek in South Australia, by Charles Sturt and John McDougall Stewart. They were on Sturt's infamous third expedition, in which he was foolishly seeking an inland sea, deep in the harsh centre of the Australian continent. The trip's gruelling nature saw Sturt's health decimated and his return to England shortly after. And the night parrot that they collected was sent back to noted ornithologist John Gould. However, it wasn't known to be the first night parrot until 1928, when it was identified as such by Gregory Matthews. In the 1870s and 80s, F.W. Andrews, a naturalist collecting for the South Australian Museum, became the most prolific collector of specimens. Currently, there are 28 known night parrot specimens held in museums globally, with 16 of these traced back to Andrews. Sadly, whilst on an expedition in 1884, perhaps to find further specimens, Andrews drowned in a well near Mount Jagan in South Australia. But the last expedition that could be deemed a success was the Calvert-Kirtland expedition of the 1890s, and we use that term tentatively. Whilst the specimen was recorded, 2 members of the party perished. No night parrots were captured, and Kirtland had to abandon 300 skins he had collected due to a shortage of supplies and water. Following this, it seems as though the parrot had disappeared into the spinifex until Burgoyne made his sighting in 1912. The history of the night parrot is a tale of near misses and illusion, this spectral mirage in the landscape, a present absence. In contrast to this, there is a tale of the night parrot that stretches far beyond these silly men with their horses, ill-equipped for not only the conditions of the unforgiving landscape, but for the nature of the bird itself.
It is here that we encounter our second borderland, moving away from these histories of misidentification, and reflect that the elusiveness of the night parrot registers as a manifestation of will and agency. Viewed from the spinifex, this history becomes one of evasion and resisting encroachment into habitats, classification, and eventual capture. In response to the ecological turn, contemporary scholarship has interrogated the perceived dominance of the human over the natural world, describing agency to the other than human, extending subjecthood beyond the anthropos. This destabilization of the primacy of the human takes on a newfound urgency amidst the sixth great extinction and becomes an imperative as we seek to truly know this world that we in part comprise. But what appears as contemporary and boundary pushing is in fact a far too late consideration of being beyond the spheres of the human, an understanding which has been central to indigenous cosmologies for tens of thousands of years. Our second borderland melds here with the third as we return to Matu country and share with you one of the earliest known stories of the night parrot, one which acknowledges the agency of the parrot in relation to the conditions of its being. Our third borderland positions the night parrot as allegorical, a narrative that can be mobilized as a way of moving between and comprehending different ways of knowing the world. Here we recount to you Lizzie Ellis's interpretation of a Matu night parrot story.
Lightning and hail fell on the two beings who had made the storm to find the bird, and their storm picked them up and threw them to the water over there, and the fire was extinguished, finished, but no bird. So they continued their search, there, here, but the bird refused to be seen. So the two beings sat and cried, "If you were just here, the bird will be over there." Hugging and crying, they still could not find the bird. They cried for that lost bird. Nothing. They searched the sky, absent. The two beings searched the places. The two beings searched the places. Kuchitalu, Yamput Mujunka, Miranan Yintajanya, Chi Pula. They searched again. Fly there, no there, lost, beyond the place of water. The two beings noticed a witchetty bush over there, whose colour was brown. And as these two beings were collecting witchetty grubs, they also searched for the night bird. And as they cooked the grubs, other beings appeared. And so the two groups sat together and discussed. And there was confusion here, there, all of them confused. For the bird could not be seen. And one said, "It is not our place to find the bird." And they never saw it again. So its mad story is finished. Finished, I tell you. And at that place beyond the water, and the bird was banished to the darkness. They threw hailstones. They made a great storm. They set fire to the spinifex. Even these great forces could not flush the bird from hiding. He was lost. Within this story, which accounts for the origins of the night parrot, we see willful absence on the part of the parrot, and we see a narrative told free from the arrogance of the human, which contrasts to the colonial endeavours not only to find the night parrot, but to catalogue and conquer the country. Dreaming stories, passed down in oral traditions, are a living record of history and creation, expressing a vibrancy in their retelling which adapts itself across temporal thresholds. These stories that emerge from deep pasts offer the listener lessons on how to live, ways of conducting oneself, particularly in relation to knowledge and country. There's an unquestionable truth to these stories, but particularly this story of the night parrot, which captures the agentic absent and willful disappearance of this bird. We, as white invaders on stolen land, meet a threshold here, one in which we recognise that this is not our story, nor is it our knowledge which has persisted despite colonial projects of dispossessment and genocide. Instead, we mobilise the borderland that manifests through the night parrot's being between, which speaks more broadly to a borderland between Western epistemology and Indigenous cosmology. And this borderland is a means by which we identify and trouble the boundaries which obscure understandings of place and being. While we recognise the inertness and lack of vibrancy that characterises the academic lexicon, we mobilise the motif of the allegory as a way of delving deeper into this story of the night parrot, seeking ways of being and living that are maybe not in opposition, but differ from that which has characterised Western thought. Understanding that the Madu story is not simply a historical account, but a narrative that speaks to other than human agency, the framework of the allegory becomes a way to access this without invading the sovereignty of cultural knowledge. Allegorical forms become particularly significant in this time of climate crisis, in which temporal trajectories are troubled by the destruction of lands and habitats, which too seek to disturb and disrupt stratigraphies of deep time. The allegory, within the frame of the humanities, calls attention to the ways in which stories are told and how crises are narrated or visualized. Allegory is a form that is particularly noted for how it stages the present's relationship to the past, and this is often articulated in terms of an engagement with tradition and a search for origins. By engaging with the allegory of the night parrot, notions of absence and extinction can be reframed within this specific understanding of the night parrot's elusiveness as a willful escape from the containment of Western collections and scientific attempts at precision and capture.
Moving across archives, narratives of Western discovery, the transformation of the landscape into one marked by pastoralism and industry, we see the traces of the parrot, unwilling to be bound by the frames of being imposed by taxonomic rigidity. The investigations of the allegory of the parrot, the absent presence of its being, is not only significant in historicizing the parrot in a trajectory of failure, elusiveness, and discovery across time, but further, within the contemporary, the night parrot has a resonance in relation to ways in which we apprehend, act, and preserve within the spheres of ecology and conservation. The recent rediscovery of the night parrot shows the significance of incorporating local knowledge into scientific studies, which has become critical given the longer and hotter summers experienced in Australia. Aboriginal fire management, known as cultural burning, became a focal point following the catastrophic 2019-2020 fire season, with questions raised about the necessity of prioritising Indigenous voices and knowledge as climate crisis intersects with decades of poor land management. To return to the night parrot and the trajectories of absence and discovery we have outlined for you, the night parrot existed without being seen. Traditional knowledge, however, acknowledged the absent presence of the night parrot as central to its being, without the need for tangible proof, something so reified today in the search for the parrot. In 1912, when Burgoyne spoke to a man from the country, an Aboriginal man named Bullocky, he stated, "That one all same rabbit, live along burrow, drink and feed about at night." Here Bullocky was speaking to the presentness of the parrot, despite its resistance to observation and collection by extensions of colonial power, further underscoring the disjunct between Indigenous cosmologies and Western scientific rationalism. Despite the metaphysical and allegorical enframings of the parrot, these speculative projections have tangible and physical consequences. The physical borderlands of the landscapes where the night parrots are sought and discovered undergo a shift from pastoral land to reserve. We present here the example of Pullen Pullen. Once a station, the discovery of a night parrot specimen here led to the acquisition of this land by the Queensland Government and Land Management Services. It was then reclassified as a reserve in which no industry is permissible and access is limited to rangers and traditional owners, subsequently protecting these swathes of the landscape from intrusion by the plunderous extractive industries.
Maintaining this allegorical framework, in which we can learn from the narrative of the night parrot, constitutes a way of talking about the importance of land and conservation, even without a clear or present threat to a specific species. Even without threat, there is the reality of irreversible loss and damage to our environments, given the immediate and observable consequences of our current climate crisis. Again, we think here of the 3 billion critters lost in the 2019-2020 bushfires and reflect that we are still struggling to comprehend and quantify this loss. Engaging with the Borderlands as a means of reflecting and interrogating our relationship to the natural world requires a shucking off of the scales of our Western worldviews towards a more actionable, responsible, and responsive framework of being. And in light of this, and the long, complicated story of the night parrot, it is the bird's continued survival that gives us the hope that in the very corners of our vision, there is the possibility for survival. This is not to presuppose that nature will adapt, but more that it will find a way. It reasserts the importance of land, the importance of ecology, and the importance of conservation, as something is lost without us witnessing it.